And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing products that everyone enjoys every single day. And if no one else will say it, Sean and I are going to say it to you right now. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate all you do to make sure that our food is safe and wholesome. If you're new to the chat, pull up a seat. My name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday at this time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we live stream on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we take your questions on food safety topics because you are the star of the show. We are here to answer your questions and hopefully provide maybe a little bit of insight into what's going on out there. And the way I always look at things is if you learn a little bit every single day and there's something new you can add to your repertoire, that's a great thing. So I see that people are starting to file in here already. Larry, good to see you down in Texas. And I am in Loveland, Colorado, where it is going to be an absolutely gorgeous day today. It's going to be, Sean, 60 degrees out here, so that I cannot complain at all. Where are you at in the world today?
Today I'm in Random Lake, Wisconsin. And if we're lucky, it'll hit 42. So congratulations, Brian, for winning the weather challenge this morning.
Yes. Victorious. And of course, Sean, if you're unfamiliar with Sean as well, my first question is, what rock do you live under? Sean is one of the leading food industry lawyers out there. And of course, he is the founder of Food Industry Council. And we're always super excited when Sean is on the show here because he always has amazing insight. So you guys are in for a treat. Oh, good. Stephanie is joining us. We haven't had Stephanie on here for a while. Good to see her. Elena's here as well. Bonnet. Awesome. Yeah, we're getting a lot of what you'll see here, Sean. It's kind of interesting with shows is we've been getting just an absolute ton of interaction here over the past few months, and it's been great. It makes it just so much fun. Fabulous. So we got a ton to cover here today. So everybody, let's join us, Sean and I, for a drink of a ceremonial beverage. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Ah, very nice. Oh, I can see your airplane model in the background. That's too cool.
Yeah.
The Cessna. That is awesome.
That one didn't burn.
So, Sean, I think this is probably new since the last time you're on. One of the things that we do now here on the chat, dad joke. Are you ready for the dad joke for today?
I'm always ready for a good dad joke.
All right, here we go. Sean, what's the one thing that never works once it's fixed?
Boy. I don't know. What is it, Brian?
A jury.
The fixed jury.
See, I'm getting more sophisticated in my dad jokes. I'm now leveling up. I'm picking out dad jokes specific for my guest.
And I'll layer it on with a ding.
Oh, wow. Bonjour. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing your name, but South Africa. Wow. Wow. That's super cool. Maureen, nice to see you. Tasia, Austin. Wow. All these super cool people we got joining us today. And so with that, guys, man, let's dive into what we're talking about here today. So one of the things that's kind of cool about what we do in consulting and legal services and things, we get kind of a view outside of the bubble. If you're working in food safety in a company, a lot of times you get kind of locked in. You're seeing your view, you're talking to the same people. You don't necessarily get a bigger picture of what's going on, which for the people who attend this chat, they know, man, that's super important because you have to stay ahead of the curve to make sure that you're addressing those things that are coming down the pike. And as we all know, a massive upheaval going on right now. All you have to do is watch the news, new administration coming in, all kinds of changes going on the regulatory side. So with that, we wanted to kind of open up the crystal ball here a little bit, look at what we've been seeing here over the year and extrapolating into what we think this is going to mean for 2025. So with that, guys, as you're seeing things out there too, please let us know in the chat here and we'll comment on those and we'll work those into our conversations as we're going forward here. So let's start with the obvious one, Sean, which is boar's head. Oh my God, right? So the boar's head issue really, it seems like every 10, 15 years we have kind of these watershed events that catch the consumer's attention. Of course, we see all of the things that they don't necessarily see, but something rises to the surface, and Boar's Head definitely fits in that category. I mean, now I've done this, and I'm sure you've done this too, is just, talking to your neighbors or talking with people at the grocery store, walking by the deli counter to see what's going on. People are aware of Boar's Head, and they say, "Oh my God, all right, so deli meat is bad. I'm never going to eat deli meat again," and it's really impacting the public. Now, McDonald's and the onions comes along, and these things tend to compound. So we wanted to kind of dive into that. Here's our first topic, and get your insights on those. So, what are you thinking?
Yeah, don't eat deli meat. And you probably shouldn't be going to McDonald's to eat either if you want to stay healthy in all sorts of different ways. I think you're right. I love deli meat. I am a big fan of McDonald's, but usually only in airports when I only have a few minutes between flights. But the airport McDonald's always tend to be a little bit slower, so it never works out. But yeah, the two really, I would say, strong organizations with really good, I think overall, a really good food safety philosophy, probably good programs, but, I'm presuming at some place, the execution was missed, right? We see Boar's Head, we've got, reports, based upon the little information that's been shared by Bill Marler, reports of some of the things that were happening in the NRs and some of the, consistent, issues that were allegedly not addressed. And I think it's interesting to me because when we think about foodborne illness outbreaks, they're kind of happening all the time, but it's only one. And because they happen relatively frequently, the public doesn't overreact in most circumstances. We kind of got used to nobody liked it. The industry hated it, but we kind of got used to leafy greens being recalled in, Thanksgiving season in the fall. Thank goodness this year was different, knock on wood. But, that got some news because it was around the holidays and people were, getting ready for Thanksgiving. But you've got a lot of other, outbreaks that kind of happen and nobody really pays that much attention. So it was interesting to me that Boar's Head kind of, exploded a little bit. And I wonder if it, it might be the connection between those products and, the youth in our society, or the young children, or the infants and babies. And if you think about it, all the press and the media that was surrounding, the baby food issues, with contaminated baby food, and, FDA kind of was a little bit bruised, right? Some of the fighters on Friday night, a week ago. And just because of its oversight and its handling. And then you have now a product that, for, individuals who are carrying, and, pregnant mothers, that, that's the risk. That's why, deli meats are so dangerous, because of Listeria. And, maybe that was what really kind of got the media a little bit more involved. We had an outbreak. We had people getting sick. It's a product that, is there are categories of people who are higher risk, including the elderly. And it just, people were kind of like, well, wait a second. If our babies aren't safe, I get it. Do things to make them safe. But now what about us? So it was interesting how it kind of caught the media's attention. And, McDonald's there too. There wasn't, I think, as much fallout from the McDonald's outbreak. People kind of looked around like, oh, well, I guess I get it, because we hear about these routinely. But, the company's not going out of business for sure. But those are two really interesting, kind of unique ones that we haven't, nobody's really been talking about Listeria and deli meat, or any problems with pathogens in McDonald's food. So it's been an interesting year for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think McDonald's is getting a little bit of slack, heat on this as well online, because they're saying, okay, well, yeah, we had this issue. It's all been corrected. And now we're issuing a $100 million marketing campaign. Marketing? what the hell? No, what are you trying to say here? That you should have done a better job of making sure the public didn't see this, or what? Why aren't you focusing on the food safety issue? Why are you focusing on marketing? I think that's kind of odd.
Yeah, I agree. I think it sounds good when you say, hey, we're addressing this with $100 million. But I raised an eyebrow too, maybe two eyebrows, when I read that, the vast majority of those dollars were, being spent, if my recollection is correct, were being spent to promote things like chicken nuggets, right? These new promos that, if you buy the nuggets, you're probably also going to get the burger. So there's a lot of marketing dollars being spent on marketing that has nothing to do whatsoever with the safety of the onions that are on the quarter pounder.
Right. Well, and that's a good point, Sean, because I think that's something that we complain about quite a bit here in food safety, is that these big issues happen and then we never really see the resolution. It's like, okay, Boar's Head, we're going to bring in this blue ribbon panel group of these industry experts, doctors, this and that, and they're going to come in and shake things up, and then it kind of just, right? Then we never hear anything, right? And that's really, really frustrating, and that's part of the reason why we do this. But, it's like, okay, well, I want to learn from your mistakes. So why they never share that information? So is that kind of like, do you think that's more of like, the company's just, kind of moving into a defensive mode once the flack is all kind of settled, and the lawyers are like, there's really not any benefit for us for sharing this information. Plus there's liability. So let's lay low. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. I think, the company itself, yes, it has an incentive to publish and speak about what it's doing, but it's not going to start doing that until it has the buy-in from the agencies and everybody's nodding their head and saying, okay, this works. We're going to let you resume operations. That's the point where you say, okay, here's what we've done, working closely shoulder to shoulder with the regulators and the public health officials. And we're proud to announce, we've made all these changes and we have these improvements, and we're very hopeful you'll stay loyal customers. So we'll hear a little bit, but years and years and years ago, I know we've talked about it on the show. I've, as a pilot, and I mentioned our burning aircraft that Jess and I had to jump out of a little while ago, years ago. But a long time ago, I said, listen, it would be really great if following every major outbreak or recall surpassing a certain threshold, the large ones, that FDA or USDA would publish, like NTSB, on the heels of an aircraft crash or accident involving property damage or personal injury, that the agencies would publish a simple 2-page report that says, okay, here are the circumstances that led up to the constellation, that led to this accident or this result or this person getting sick or this outbreak. And here's, what could have done. Here's where we assign fault, and here's what could have been done to prevent it. Super simple. And then on the heels of each of these events, we'd have some insight as to, okay, what were the causes and what could have been done to prevent it. And then we all learn from it. Interestingly, just within the last few days, I saw Frank Giannis post something where he was, and he's heard me say this, and he sort of echoed those comments and said, listen, I think we really need reports being generated, following these events so that the rest of the industry can see what's happening and learn from it. So I'm a staunch advocate. Maybe I need to start talking about it more. I think with enough people kind of making that push, that is something that I could foresee happening, and that would be a great tool for us. Imagine having the ability, Brian, to carry that 2-page summary of that, outbreak or recall into the CEO's office and saying, just read this. This is exactly what's happening in our facility.
Yeah.
And that would make some pretty significant change for sure.
Definitely. And I think, part of this is human nature, right? Because people don't like to come out and say, hey, guess what? Woo, we suck. We did a terrible job at this. And here's all the crappy things that we did. Yay. Right. And the federal agencies are even worse, right? They never want to admit that they're wrong or even support things. I mean, it's like, when you file your processes for LACF manufacturing with FDA, they don't tell that your process is okay. They only will issue a letter of no objection, right? It's like, okay, well, we're not going to say we agree with you, but all right, fine, right? We'll see how you do. And I remember in the past, I worked for a company and they brought in a bunch of fancy consultants to go into the plants and look for efficiencies and things like this. And then they would issue this giant report at the end of all the things that the plant needed to improve upon. And there was a plant manager who was a pretty funny guy, and he called it his "I suck" report. It's the same thing, right? It's like, okay, here's why I suck, and the reaction is to protect, it's to protect yourself, and definitely we see that on the agency side as well. So when these type of issues happen, the agency takes a beating as well, and I mean, gosh, even if you're on X or something like this, you'll see a post where someone will say, okay, here's a picture of a rock. Now fight, right? And people are like, that's not a rock, that's a pebble. And it's just, those things are just constantly negative, and it can really drag you down on that side too. But on that reaction side of things, and I think this is really important. So let's kind of dive into that. What are you seeing from the regulatory agencies then, Sean, in reaction to these very public criticisms of their activities?
Yeah. It's kind of one might argue it, kind of follows the same pattern that we saw from the regulatory standpoint with like PCA, where, the state of Georgia was in that facility. They had inspected the facility. They gave it good ratings. Only, a short period of time before, the outbreak was discovered, associated back to their products, and they were shut down. Right. Same, I found over my career that the agencies are the folks that we deal with within the agencies are, their fear comes from not doing enough if they suspect there's an issue with a product in commerce. So if they allow the company to wait 2 days to respond to a request for information from the agency while they're preparing for a recall, they're terrified that, oh my God, is my supervisor going to come in and say, what in the world are you doing? This needed to be done yesterday. Why is it now 2 days later? Or even the scope, right? Defining the scope. It's a lot of this is not only driven by the science, but the individual who is influencing the agency's perspective or current thinking on what the scope of a recall should be. And, there's a psychology element or psychological element where, these regulators are going to maybe be a little more aggressive, take a little more time, request more information, and demand broader recalls because they're afraid of their own jobs and protecting their position within the agency. So you've got that human element. But the one thing that I've seen that has changed, I'd say within the last year, is and this is both on the FDA side and the USDA side, is when the agencies are now finding Listeria either in a finished product or on a food contact surface on a line within a facility. They are, and we've got an issue where product, arguably needs to be recalled because it could, it's suspected to be contaminated. The agency is kind of departing from its, and this is just what I've observed this year, departing from the sort of old school way of thinking, which is zone 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how we operate and how we define things. Zone 1 is a food contact surface, period. Zone 2 is a surface immediately adjacent to a food contact surface. It could be half an inch away. It's a zone 2 if food isn't touching it. Yeah. But the agency seems to have said, well, and we see this in the guidance that the agency issues for inspections, that a zone 1 is really defined far more broadly in the agency's eyes as a processing area. So not just the line on which the food was touching or the conveyor belt, but the area, the general area in which it's being produced. So we've seen a number of recalls where the agencies have pushed hard the companies to recall product produced on other lines, not implicated with the product or the line on which it was produced. And they're casting these extremely wide nets and in essence forcing companies to produce everything that was to recall everything that was produced in any proximity to these products, even though there's no scientific connection. It's really disturbing. And continuing this trend of the agencies, it's kind of like a real heavy cart full of boulders on the top of the hill, and it starts rolling slowly. And now I think it's just where it's starting to pick up some momentum, and the agencies are coming in and they're torching the places, right? Saying you got to recall it all, everything you ever made. And, it's this march, I think, towards regulating legacy facilities out of business.
Wow. So there was a ton there, and I want to make sure everybody caught that. So the regulatory agencies are expanding what they consider to be zone 1. And we talked about this on the chat here before, because most food companies are like, okay, I'm going to do my environmental monitoring around the environment, maybe some zone 3 and some 4s. I'm never, ever going to sample zone 1, and maybe an occasional 2 if I'm really worried about something. As I've talked about, right, that's all flipped on its head. So not only are the agencies sampling more zone 1s, they're also defining more things as zone 1. That's huge.
Yeah, they haven't said this, in my conversations, but their actions sort of prove the point. So let's, if the agency comes in and it samples a line, and the company holds all the products, and let's say it's a zone 1 as we would define it, conveyor belt, it's positive. In that sort of routine scenario, I don't see the agency saying, hey, everything on line 2 now is suspect as well. But what I do see happening is when we have a finished product test that in the market, let's say that's positive, company has some environmental samples surrounding a particular area in the facility that were positive. Maybe they responded, they did corrective actions, but now we've got, evidence of maybe some persistence in that area. We've got product in the market. Now the agency wants a recall. That's where we see sort of this distinction being blurred, where they're saying, hey, not only the stuff that was produced in the batch that we collected the sample from and it was positive, but the batch before, after, the line next to you, and the line next to that. And that's where I'm saying, whoa, this is unlike anything we've ever seen.
Wow. So it's more of a defensive measure on their part. It's like, okay, we don't have any evidence for this, but we're going to cover our butts to make sure that if something does pop up, I mean, because in the past, Sean, we've seen where you'll have a recall scenario and it's announced to the public, and then maybe a week or 2 later, you'll see, okay, so and so is expanding this recall, and generally that's a cue for us that says, oh, okay, FDA went in and found more issues in that facility, so based on that information, they're expanding that recall. It sounds like they're going directly to step 2.
Yeah, and it's tough because, and I do think this could be a week long of episodes in and of itself, but every recall in this country is supposed to be voluntary, and the company should be able to define for itself what batch, what line, what time it was produced that it wants to recall that product. If it's wrong, fine. We have to expand it later on, or maybe we were too narrow, maybe we were too broad. But it's really for the company to decide. And where I become frustrated is when I see the agency get on the phone with 24 of its recall representatives breathing down the neck of the company, telling it that they're going to produce the recall release, that they're going to publish it, that the company only has 25 minutes by the time it's emailed to review it and respond, which response they'll ignore. And, oh, by the way, the company may only want to, recall stuff from line 1 because that's what the science is pointing at. But the agency says, well, if you can't prove, that, to your point, proving the negative, that the rest of the lines in that space aren't implicated as well, you're going to recall it all. No, and we can't force you, so it's your decision. But wink, wink, if you don't, we're going to have our team in your facility tomorrow morning, and they're going to be there for 6 months, tearing everything apart. And you know what? We may say we're just going to withdraw your registration while we go through this process. So in essence, they've got a gun to these companies' heads, and they're now forcing the companies to do things that are not in any way, shape, or form voluntary. So I think there's some constitutional implications here as well. But when we're talking about the practical, what happens when they're there what's really happening.
Yeah, the whole Chevron Looper Bray, right? That's a whole nother conversation.
Can't stop the FDA by holding up a copy of the Constitution and saying, "You shall not pass." They'll just kind of
with your staff,
anyways, right?
But yeah, I mean, so part of this is, and again, this is something I've always taught my teams, is never forget that the regulatory agencies, so FDA, USDA, are not scientific agencies; they're political entities. They are part of the government. And if it comes down to you or them, guess what? You're going under the bus. So you need to be prepared for those type of responses on those type of situations, because just because the FDA is doing it doesn't mean that they're going to be rational about it. Because if they're under extreme pressure, if they're getting media groups and they're seeing headlines on the news and people being interviewed with sick kids or whatever, and to your point, Sean, their boss is going in their office and saying, "You better find somebody now, buddy, who's causing this." And so it's like, right? And so that pressure is on, and we've seen this. And to your point, that the cart rolling downhill, we've seen high profile recalls here within the past couple of years with environmental monitoring results with no linkage to product, where FDA said you need to recall. So I'm thinking kind of like the environmental issues that Jif had in their facility, where it's like, okay, nope, you got to recall it. And it's hard for a company to defend against those things if you don't have the data.
Mm-hmm. And 5:00 at night with half the agency breathing down your neck. Those are more nits, I think. But I'll just throw this out there, and then you can decide when to weave it in. But so we're getting additional pressure from the regulatory side. Oh, and then let's to cap this off. I wanted just to touch on the class action lawsuits, Brian. But what does the agency then do in response when it sees that there are, Bill Marler's publishing stuff about Boar's Head, the NRs are out there. There's allegations that the agency, although in the facility every day, allowed this to persist. So the agency is being scarred. So USDA in response says, we need to make sure, we've got a tight ship. I want you to reach out to all companies, USDA regulated companies who are sort of in the deli space, whether that's ready to eat cooked chicken or deli salads, or the list goes on, and either get in there and do a food safety assessment, or I want you eyes on all their testing results from their environmental programs. And if we see any companies that have some trends, we need to go right and get in there. So it's been extremely aggressive with the agency sort of sweeping across the country, looking for, I call it mass swabathons, right? Getting in these companies and trying to, identify any companies that have any Listeria issues whatsoever. So it's, it's tough. There's this zero tolerance standard for a pathogen that is, almost zero probability you can 100% eliminate it from a legacy facility is, I think, an unreasonable standard. Do we have to protect the public health? Yes, absolutely. Do we need to do it by saying there can never be any Listeria whatsoever in any product, which is what we've chosen to do here? It's, it's a good goal. But if we look at Canada and Europe and, thresholds for Listeria, that might, it might have been an okay approach for us here to take, but we didn't. So that
exactly. Well,
yeah.
You and I have talked about this in the past, but before, right, is where you kind of have this balance where the regulatory agencies, okay, as part of your food safety programs, you need to have an aggressive environmental monitoring program in place where you're aggressively trying to find contamination and eliminating that. And as long as you're doing that and you're removing these sources of contamination that have been in your facility for a time, we're cool, essentially is what they had said. Now it's like, nope, right? So are we creating evidence against ourselves in these situations? And some companies may reach the conclusion, yes, we're going to back off on our environmental monitoring program, which is not good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I think the answer, there really isn't an answer. It's almost like I don't want to say this, but don't get caught. I mean, Listeria is in every facility, but the key is, staying ahead of it. And the way I've described it is, rather than what typically happens in these facilities, and this is what industry I think really needs to do to stay ahead of this, is rather than seeing that positive Listeria, putting it in the Excel spreadsheet, aggressively clean and sanitize. But, we think we keep seeing it over and over again, every other week or every week or, once, whatever. And it's still there, and nothing ever changes. And then all of a sudden it's 2 years later and you're still intermittently seeing these. And I think for us to get ahead of it, the dialogue needs to change. We need to, if we have a positive, that's an airplane that started on fire on the runway, and we need to roll the airport fire department with their bright yellow trucks and shining lights and foam and hit it, whatever we found and everything around it, and just destroy it. And the alarm bells should be going off, and it should be, high alert. And then we get it, and then we go on business as usual. But it's that intensity that we don't have right now in a lot of food companies, and I think culture will help that as well.
I know that, and that's a good point. And so part of this, and I think what you need to do, and you'd mentioned this earlier, Sean, I want to make sure everybody caught this, is that philosophically, FDA or USDA is asking us to prove a negative, which is impossible. So it's, okay, Sean, I believe in leprechauns. And you're like, what? That's kind of a weird belief. Why that? Well, I just do. Prove that they don't exist. And you're like, well, what do you mean? You're the one who is putting forward the supposition that leprechauns exist. The burden of proof is on you. No. You have to prove that they don't exist. And that's what FDA is doing, right? They're saying, prove that you don't have a problem.
Right.
And that's untenable. That's a really, really pretty much impossible situation to be in, but it's where we're at. So what you have to do is put your FDA hat on and look at your programs from the outside and say, okay, we're not sampling zone 1 in our plants. If FDA came in, what would they say? Right? And a lot of times using external sources to help bolster this case, and this gets back to what you said earlier, if we had a report after the investigation of Boar's Head saying, here's the 5 critical things that went wrong, that goes a long way to help providing that evidence in your company that you need to persuade senior leadership that this is important. But you have to be thinking about this not only in your programs for the correct purpose, which is, all right, we want to find and eliminate potential threats in our environment. You also need to think of this in terms of defending your company, unfortunately.
Yep, absolutely. So, it's a tough world for food industry professionals today, and likely only going to get much tougher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So with the zones you had mentioned earlier, so in the FDA Investigator Operations Manual, they're really good, and you quoted these as we were talking. There's different zone definitions, 1, 2, 3, 4. And someone had commented here earlier, if you have a small facility, essentially everything in that room, less than 20,000 square feet, is already considered zone 1 and 2, and that's in the manual. So do you see a revision from the regulatory agencies coming to redefine those, or is this just an informal expansion of how they're looking at 1s and 2s?
Yeah, I think it's an expansion. And it's, I don't see the agency maybe in sort of its manual and its guidance. It may kind of sort of do this sort of semantic shift. But I think it's going to be more just in practice, so it can't be challenged. You're telling me that you want a more expansive definition of zone 2, or zone 1, but why? Prove to me, right, that the pathogens on one corner of the room are going to make it to the other corner. Show me that.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I do see the agency through its conduct beginning to kind of really push the limits and force companies to expand the scope of their recalls. And I think it is really being driven by a realization in the agencies that if there's two ways to look at this, Brian. when we think about Listeria control in the processing environment. The first is Listeria is probably going to be there at some point. It is going to move throughout the facility, whether it's transient within the facility or it's coming in from another source and then leaving. We're going to expect to see it. And if it's there, great. If we could keep it in the drain, control it, stop it from getting on the conveyor belts, we're golden. We're good, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of one bucket. The other bucket on the other side is like, stop, hold on. Let's just huddle. Listen, I know I have Listeria monocytogenes in this drain. It's going to kill a lot of people if it gets into the food, potentially, depending on who the population is eating it. But somebody walks by, takes a cart past here, drags a hose across the top of it, bottom of their foot, just the machine's running, right? And the vibration and, that now it's aerosolized and it's moving. And I promise you, it's going to get in the food. If you know it's here, it's going to be over there, and it's only a matter of time, right? So you have those competing kind of, philosophies, and the agency is leaning now towards, if it's in the room, it can get anywhere. So everything is suspect, and that's where the shift in the agency thinking is going away from our old sort of very conscriptive. We had E. coli in this, on this trim combo, and we know it's only this combo if we're testing at N60, and the rest are fine, and that is gone. Now it's on its way out, I would say. And now the agencies are like, listen, there shouldn't be pathogens anywhere in the processing environment, which is, again, I've been saying this for years. We're moving more towards pharmaceutical standards. I'll stop there.
No, I totally agree. And I think I probably stole that saying from you because I agree 100%. So Cortland's making a good point here, which is this shows you why the validation processes are so important. And under EPA and the validation of the efficacy of the actual working of these different chemicals, we have that information to fall back on. But FDA is going to come in, and you can pretty much count on this. So you need to be taking Sean's second scenario from that conversation and saying, okay, let's pretend FDA walks into the plant, they see my results, they look at that drain and say, oh, okay, prove to me that it didn't get anywhere else. Right? Sean just rattled off the top of his head 5 or 6 different ways that it can very easily, right? All you need is some knucklehead with a hose going through that room, and it's everywhere.
And think about the brilliance of it, Brian. Prove to me that this didn't get onto your food contact services. Well, I can't. I don't have any data. And they're like, yeah, maybe if you were, testing zone 1, you'd have the data and you can answer our question.
Right.
Which is the sort of the where they're trying to push companies to go, is doing the zone 1 testing. So maybe this is a tool towards that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're 100% right. And so if you're in charge of food safety for a company and you're listening to this right now, you need to really, really look at your programs and say, okay, if I have a product, let's say a ready-to-eat product or something that's on the radar screen with FDA or USDA, they're coming, and these questions are going to be asked. We need to prepare for these now. So to your point, if FDA comes in and says, okay, well, show me your zone 1 data to nullify what I'm pressing relative to contamination in your facility. Well, I do have zone 1 results. Because remember, under FSMA, and we'll talk specifically about FDA here, but they have access to all those records anyway, right? You cannot, if that's part of your food safety plan, all documentation, all procedures, all records, everything for your food safety plan, FDA has a regulatory and statutory right to look at that information. You can't hide it. So you have to have a program where it's essentially open book, and you need to prepare for that.
Well said.
Let's see. So Cortland had a question here for us. Will EPA allow you to clean drains? Some states don't allow cleaning to avoid killing wastewater flora. Yeah, interesting. Something that's always a huge challenge in plants is BOD, right? So dissolvable oxygen, what type of chemicals you're putting down the drain. Do you have a water treatment facility at your own location? Larger plants that I've had in my past, right? The local water authorities will install measuring equipment directly at the discharge for your plant and fine you accordingly. So it's Like it's what we talk about. We're developing quality and food safety systems. Everything is interlinked. So if you're like, okay, fine, I'll take care of this. I will just start dumping hundreds of gallons of sanitizer all over everything. The local water treatment company is not going to be very happy with you. So you need to think about those things as well, for sure. It's a good point, Cortland. So we've seen here in the comments, Sean, which is what's on everybody's mind, is we've seen already through this year reorganizations taking place at FDA with Jim Jones and now the human division within that and the reorg. Now we have a new administration coming in, and RFK Jr. is going to be presumably at this point heading up Health and Human Services, and then of course these agencies fall under that. Who's going to be heading up that? Tons of change around that. And I've seen it from my viewpoint already. So for some of my clients, we've had questions from FDA for product being imported and these type of things. And responding to FDA and getting back a response, pulling teeth. Absolutely. Right? You just feel like you're shouting into the void right now. Are you seeing that on your side?
Yeah, I've got a request still pending with the FDA TAN network from August 19th.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I sent a reminder yesterday saying, hello, we're still here. People still need to eat. Please. So, yeah, I think, there may be there's weird things happening. There's an element of paralysis where I think everybody's just kind of like, we're just looking around and trying to figure out like what happens next, right? So there's a little bit of reluctance really to stick your head real high up above the weeds and be like, hey, I'm trying to pass these new rules that are going to be really hard for industry to comply with and cost consumers a ton of new money for their chicken. So nobody's really kind of going to be saying much. But then on the other hand, you also have sort of the push within the agencies to push stuff as much out as they can before the new administration, I'm just talking with very broad strokes. So, right. I'm perplexed if we think about RFK Jr. and what impact that ultimately will have on food safety regulation. On the one hand, everything we know about him is, tells us that he's going to be very concerned and very focused on nutrition and making sure, we've got clean labels and we're not, these ultra processed ingredients maybe are, looked at more closely, all of those things. Right. Right. And, you would think the same would apply to food safety. Maybe there'd be an acknowledgement and recognition that, as long as all of us has been on this planet, we've been taught, to cook your chicken and handle it carefully because it, presume it has salmonella. So maybe, he embraces that and says, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay if we sell chicken with salmonella because we've been doing it for as long as humans have been living, right? Or at least as long as we've been testing them. So I don't know, Brian. On the one hand, I think it's just a phone call from some, large chicken producer who is a strong supporter of President Trump's campaign and says, you can't do this. It's going to shut down the poultry industry and make food more expensive for consumers. This salmonella is an adulterant standard. And I can see the administration saying, put it on hold. That's not a priority for us. Put it on hold. Business as usual. We're going to focus on other things and we'll get to it if we get to it. So I kind of think that's what happened, that might happen on the salmonella side and some of these more stringent requirements, but we just don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, right? So imagine you're RFK Jr. coming in. You're a human being just like everybody else, and you've only got so much time, right? So you're going to prioritize. And from what we've seen so far, his prioritization, right? He's looking at pharmaceuticals, vaccines, things like this. We've seen on YouTube videos of RFK. Have you seen that one where he's got all the food on the table, right? He's got Fruit Loops and other things. And he's and I feel for those food companies, right? Because they're all just, oh my God. Right? And it was a video, he was talking about artificial food colors. So, in particular, he was talking about one of the yellow dyes. And, hey, did you know this comes from the leftover waste of, petroleum manufacturing and these type of things? And he's like, other countries don't allow this. Why are we allowing this? So I think part of this is pulling out that crystal ball and saying, okay, if you're him, what are you going to focus on first? And he's talking publicly about the things that has his attention. So if you're a food company and you're making, we'll keep that example going, you're making Fruit Loops, it's like, oh, okay, well, I already have European and Canadian formulations that use these other materials in those. I'll just switch those over to the US.
Right.
Okay, well, now you have packaging changes and all these things. Now you have a lot of pressure on the procurement side because now everybody's scrambling for the same ingredients, which means pricing is going to go up. They're going to want to get this change done as quickly as possible, which puts pressure on us on the food safety side because now we have new suppliers to approve, and who knows if they're legit or not. And we saw this with Ukraine. So food companies that used sunflower oil, for example, in their beverages or whatever, found out really quickly that, oh shit, most of the sunflower oil in the world comes from Ukraine. And now where am I going to find sunflower oil? And they would reformulate or scramble to find secondary suppliers who may or may not be legit. So there's a indirect impact on food safety that you need to be careful with as well. So we know for sure, right, that those are the things that he's looking at. So those are things he would probably start with. And as far as human nature on the regulatory side, right, FDA personnel are just like us. So to your point, right, it's like, okay, I'm just going to keep my head down here for a little while, and okay, right. I'm just hoping I don't get the axe, and that Vivek and Elon Musk don't bring their axes over to my area. So I'll just try and keep it low.
Right. Yeah. And the other side of this too is, if you just try to predict what, Trump would say in response to any request from RFK to Junior to, make massive changes. I think Trump would kind of look at himself and say, well, I like garbage food and I'm 78. I just got elected president of the United States. What's the problem? Mm-hmm. Let it be. You got that sort of like huge yin and yang between those two personalities. So we'll see.
I don't think RFK is going to mess with his McDonald's. That's that's not going to happen. But people make some really good points here in the comments, guys. Keep them coming. So part of this is how much authority he's going to have to do this, right? So he may say, okay, we're getting rid of red dye number 40 or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you just can't say that. You have to go through a process and you have to update the register and all these other regulatory bureaucratic things that need to happen, right? So this isn't going to, right? It's not going to be Thanos snapping his fingers. It's going to take a little while for these things to come in play. So we'll see on that side. So, so like Alexis is saying here, right, this hits other industries as well. So those dyes are used in medications. And so there's comments here on pet food, where pet food, if they have allergen controls, interesting, will cause pricing to go up. And we're all seeing high pressure on that. Austin brings up a good point here. What do you think about this one, Sean? Is we're getting lots of grumbling around enhanced traceability, FSMA 204. And I'm seeing letters from retailers now saying, okay, sign this saying that you comply with enhanced traceability if you're making high risk products. Any thoughts around what Austin's asking here on enhanced traceability?
Yeah, normally in a vacuum, I'd say, there is a push within Congress. Well, and I guess it raises some questions with Republicans in control of the House and Senate. They can pretty much pass, well, if they were so inclined, whatever they want. But in his first campaign, President Trump came out, I think it was about October before the November election, maybe it was September. And he said, if I'm elected, I'm going to basically defund, how ironic, defund the food police, right? And this is, the attack on the food industry is just not conscionable. Within 24 hours, that post was taken down from the campaign website and never mentioned again. And I think the advice that Trump got from his advisors was the one thing that's probably more important to the American consumer is than being able to afford their food is to have faith in their food that it's not going to make them sick or kill them. So you need to stop. And he listened. And any reference to the food police or food kind of went out the door. So, as people have asked, will Congress unravel 204? But my answer has been, if once you put a food safety regulation in place that truly is designed to stop outbreaks faster, to save lives, to prevent illness, to allow us to trace back to the original source, it's real hard for anybody with a soul, a human being, to be like, oh, well, I think I'm going to oppose a rule that might save some small child's life, a little girl's life, because now they can't trace the cucumber back fast enough, and we've got now another couple of dead children. I just don't see, some people, yes, it's too much cost for the benefit that we're getting. But, even controlling the House, Congress, I think it would be hard for some conservatives to vote to turn a rule that's designed to help people back in the other direction. And that's just true for any public safety rule. Yeah. Regulations, we're worried about, the gray with green tipped wing owl. And, we're afraid that, if you develop this land that that's a different argument than we're trying to save children's lives by making sure the food they get is safe. So I don't see it being pulled back. I do think the salmonella rule for poultry has more likelihood of being put on pause. I think the traceability rule will move forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this gets back to our theme for today is, don't forget that these agencies are political. And it, obviously applies to the politicians in Congress and the Senate, is no politician wants to see the headline, Senator votes to kill children.
Yeah.
Because that's what the headline would be. And so they're like, no, I'm not messing with that. So just from a pragmatic standpoint, they don't want to do that. I did want to touch also here really quickly on something you mentioned earlier, which is class action lawsuits. So we'd mentioned in our prep that you're expecting some potential upticks in activity around that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's really frustrating and unfortunate. So with the Totally Cool recall, involved various ice cream products that occurred, I think, in spring or the summer. That was an example where the FDA just came in and just swept all the chess pieces off the table and said everything that you produced in this space needs to be recalled, where it really was only a very small area within the facility that had sort of a niche organism had a problem. But on the heels of that recall, a law firm in Seltzer in New York filed a lawsuit, I believe in the Southern District of New York, against that company, a class action lawsuit, because they recalled their product. Now, and I'll just make this real quick, class action lawsuit basically in the food industry usually deals with packaging and what's said on the package. Let's say the package says no artificial preservatives or no preservatives. And then the ingredients, we see citric acid listed. Now, is it there for a flavoring agent? Is it there for some other function? Or is it there as a preservative? It may have lots of functions, but the plaintiff lawyers argue, hey, you said no preservatives. It's got citric acid, which we know to be a preservative. You've misled consumers. They paid too much for your product. They paid a premium thinking they were getting something they didn't. Now that same theory has been thrown over on the recall side for the saying, hey, you sold product that you then recalled and it had Listeria in it. And if our clients, the consumer, knew it had Listeria in it, they wouldn't have paid as much. Maybe they wouldn't have bought it at all. So you've enriched yourself, the tune of the value of the product for every consumer who bought it. And then you recall. Yeah, I don't care. Well, it gets gray and confusing when you get into they have a remedy. But they bought the product, now you have to reimburse them. So now we have a class action lawsuit. And the problem with that is, recalls are voluntary, sort of. We talked about this earlier, but let's pretend they're voluntary. And we're making a decision, you and me, about our food company and whether we recall $10 million worth of product because we want to do the right thing. But we're like, and maybe the risk is real low, Brian. So we want to do the right thing and we think we're going to do the right thing. But wait, there's this new thing called class action lawsuits being brought against food companies. Well, if we recall this product, it costs us $10 million. We're going to have a $10 million class action lawsuit because of a recall. You know what? Let's leave it in the market. Let's take the risk. And that's the problem with what's happening. So we saw Boar's Head was a class action lawsuit was filed against them. Meeting Place reported yesterday, I believe, that Boar's Head settled that lawsuit, that class action lawsuit. Personally, I think it was an awful strategy. I think Boar's Head is trying to clear the decks, resolve everything, get it all settled. We don't care. We just want to reset and not have any of this stuff hovering over our head. But what it has done now is given this plaintiff class action lawsuit the perception that these class actions are legitimate because Boar's Head is settling one and they're going to keep coming. I had another client who class action lawsuit was brought against for an egg recall. Small, tiny farm in Wisconsin, Amish farmer, great guy. And now he's facing a national class action lawsuit because he made the decision to recall some eggs that had salmonella, notwithstanding the warning on the package. It's ludicrous. Wow. And there's others. So this is not, it's not a good time for the food industry. Well, it's never a good time for the food industry, but it's even not as good today with these class action lawsuits and the related exposure now hanging on the horizon.
Yeah, I can see commercials on TV now. Have you been injured by your food? Contact us at 1-800.
Right. Did you eat a Hot Pocket? If so, call this number now.
Yeah, and we've been through this in the food industry before with slack fill products. So there was class action lawsuits where people would open their bag of chips and say, "Hey, this thing's only half full. I'm getting ripped off." And we see the warnings on packages now that says product is filled to weight, not volume, which was a direct result of all that.
Yeah, they continue to pop. We have 2 right now that we're dealing with slack fill. So yeah, it's never a dull moment.
Wow. So lots going on. So yeah, we'll bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. But
if I could,
before I ask for your final comments, I do have one thing to put a silver lining on this: is use this to your advantage. Is take this information that we're talking about here today, go to your senior leadership and say, "Hey guys, we need to really take a hard look at our environmental monitoring program and how we're doing things because of this and what we're talking about. I want the budget, I want the funding to begin a more aggressive program so that we can proactively, hopefully, mitigate any risk relative to FDA or USDA activity moving forward." Use this information to help educate, right? Don't keep this to yourself. Educate within your company.
Fabulous. So, final thoughts. First, I'm just looking at the comments here. Attorneys are getting hungry. Well, let me just say, lawyers, just like children, want a piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. Let there be no mistake. And lawyers, just like the rest of us, have to eat too. So, unfortunately, we have to deal with them. I don't like lawyers either, but I hope that the perspectives we shared today, you found at least a little bit helpful.
Yep. And it's an important thing in what we do in food safety and regulatory and food quality, right? It's if you're spending all your time thinking about now, that's a mistake. You need to be thinking about what's coming down the road and how you can be proactive in these type of activities and checking up on stuff. So we talk about, the locals group here and joining that. But the other big piece of this is Sean at, a great deal of work and expense for his firm puts together, and I just put the link in here. He has a food recall search database that, we were chatting here before we got on the air. I use this at least 2 or 3 times a week, and it's an amazing service. You can go in there, look up recalls, see what's going on in the industry, look at different trends, look for different product categories that FDA is focusing on. What type of recalls are out there? So use that database. I mean, Sean's got tons of good information on his website, so use that. And I would imagine you probably don't hear this enough, but like we talked about here being in the chat, I wanted to thank you for doing that because it's an amazing service you do.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience, man. Like you had said here, Sean, fantastic comments here. It gets better every week. So everybody, we're gonna have to put a bookend to our chat for this week, but fantastic chat, everybody. Thank you, and thanks to Sean. And of course, we're back here next week, same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And I'll have another amazing guest like Sean on to talk with everybody. But in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Have a great time out there. Enjoy the wonderful weather. And we'll see you then.
Thanks, Brian.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.